Hey guys, it's Cameos, and this is my review for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And this film, we do focus on Doctor Strange, and basically, as we know, after the events of No Way Home, he has opened up this portal now to the multiverse, and as a result, all of these consequences start to emerge, as well as this new threat that may be too powerful for both Strange and his team to defeat. So I was very excited for this film, as I'm sure many people were. I mean, this is a movie that I think the second that it was announced, I had a lot of excitement about. And here's the thing. The first Doctor Strange movie is not one that I am overly fond of. It's a film that at the time I really did like quite a bit. And as time has gone on, I just don't care as much about it. It's not necessarily a movie I dislike necessarily. I just think it's one of the lesser MCU films that honestly just kind of gets worse the more I think about it, for sure. But that being said, you know, hearing the prospect of the sequel and what they could really do with it, I really did feel like Multiverse of Madness was going to be a much better film that utilizes this character, a much better utilization of this character. You know, we've seen Doctor Strange and how good he was in Infinity War and Endgame and, you know, No Way Home. You know, I really felt like they were going to do something really different when it came to this character, and this just seemed like a film that would suit him a lot better, having someone like Sam Raimi at the helm and all this other stuff. I was really expecting this to be this crazy adventure. The fact that it was opening up the summer movie season, I just got so pumped for it the more the months went on. It became one of my most anticipated films, not just of the summer, but of the entire year, and I have seen it, and overall, I do think this film does very much deliver. Now, that being said, this is not the big epic adventure that I think a lot of people are really going to be expecting, as I'm sure many people have already known, because this movie's been out for quite a few weeks now. But that being said, it still is a really well done MCU film that's very different than what I was expecting it to be. So we are going to enter right now. And look, as usual, starting off with the cast here, it's something that the MCU always just does such an amazing job with. I think when it comes to all of their actors, I think they rarely mess up in terms of casting, and thankfully that is very much still the case here. I think everyone just does such an amazing job. Talking about Benedict Cumberbatch, I think he still does a really excellent job within this role. He is fit into this role quite nicely. You know, he's still very charismatic. He still is someone who has this intellect of sorts, and I think that that's something he does a really good job with, but I also feel he's given a little bit more to do this time around. We get a little bit more into what kind of person that Strange really does want to be and how that compromises with the role that he's supposed to take on, and I think that's something that Cumberbatch just did a really excellent job with within this film. He's someone that you do find yourself rooting for, and I think works very well in this film overall. I think this is still a really strong performance for him. He's given a lot to work with, especially in the third act of the movie, and I think he definitely does a great job with that. But hands down, this film belongs to Elizabeth Olsen, who does, of course, play Wanda. And look, she has given an incredible performance, you know, over the years. I think of things like Civil War, even, you know, starting off in that. I think that's really when I started to realize just how great of a character, you know, Wanda can really be. And then you look at, like, Infinity War and how great she was there, and of course we just coming off WandaVision and her getting this chance to really showcase you know, the inner struggle that Wanda's had throughout all her life. This film is very much in many ways a direct sequel to that, and as such we see Wanda in this film given the most emotionally hefty material that she's really gotten yet. I really can't get too much into what she ends up doing in this film, but the role she has to play here is very hard to pull off, and she balances all of that, I think, perfectly here. It combines the sort of heydays of, you know, her trying to figure out her powers with the Wanda that we saw in WandaVision, who has a lot more clarity on who she's supposed to be. You know, she's constantly balancing back and forth between the idea of, you know, is she a hero, is she a villain, and I think that's something that Olsen just does such a great job with in this film. It is such a multi-layered performance here. Again, it's one that I think is really hard to pull off, and I think you need the right actor to really sell it, and Olsen absolutely does that here. we really do get to see the direct effect that the events of WandaVision has had on this character, and it makes for such a emotionally powerful performance that might just be the best work Olsen has ever given within the MCU. I was just so impressed by what she did here. There's one scene in the third act especially that nearly had me on the verge of tears. I just absolutely love what she has done with this character. She is without a doubt one of the best actors to work within the MCU. I've been saying it for a while now, but I think especially after this film, she's without a doubt in the top half, I think, of performances here. I just absolutely love what she ended up bringing to this character, and hands down, I think is enough of a reason to really see this film. But the rest of the cast also does do some really great work here. Benedict is still a ton of fun in this movie. I always enjoy the dynamic that he has with Benedict Cumberbatch, and I think that they're back and forth. You know, we get a lot more interplay between these two, and I really liked what he ended up doing here. Chiwetel Ejiofor is still really good. Rachel McAdams has a lot more to do, actually, this time around, and that's something I really appreciated. Again, can't get too much into what her role really is in this film, but I really did enjoy what she ended up doing. But the other standout we have to talk about here is Xochitl Gomez, who does play America Chavez, a character I was not overly familiar with prior to this film, but after this film, I'm very excited to see what they really do with her, because she displays such a confidence and charisma when it comes to her that really just makes me excited to see what they end up doing with her further down the line. This is such a interesting character. You know, she's able to pretty much just like conjure up these portals, and she's a big reason for a lot of the multiverse hopping throughout this movie. And though she doesn't get a lot of depth in this film, I think what she's given, Gomez does a really good job with, and definitely is someone I'm excited to see in future entries for sure. Like I said, I think overall the cast is really good here, and the acting, as usual, is definitely a high point of this film. Alright, but now let's get to the directing and the writing here, because this is really where we get to the things that I think really do work about this movie. Easily the thing I was most excited for going into Multiverse of Madness, you know, amongst all of the possibilities of what this film could really entail, is the director. The directing, of course, being from Sam Raimi, who I think is actually given a lot more creative freedom than we normally see for MCU directors. And it's not like I feel like, you know, the directors in MCU films aren't given the potential to do something of their own. But it's pretty clear watching this movie, this is one of the most distinctive visions that we have seen in any Marvel movie to date. I mean, this really is, you know, without getting into too much, the closest thing we will ever get to a horror MCU film, and I was very much here for it. I really love just how much this film allowed Raimi to kind of just like loosen up and do pretty much whatever he wanted, especially once this film gets past its first act. Once we get to like the second act of this movie, this film really does become something different that you've really never seen before within a Marvel movie, and that's something I just really respected from Raimi. I like that he did go into this wanting to do something different. It feels very much like a Sam Raimi movie. The comedy is still there, and when it works, it's a lot of fun. You know, the drama, the action, all that's really great here. But if I had to classify Multiverse of Madness as one thing, it's a horror film. This film is very eerie at points. This film has this underlying, you know, creepiness to it, and I think a lot of that is due to Raimi's directing. He does such a great job with really just kind of diving headfirst into the more sinister elements of this film. You know, what can you really do with a concept like this? I feel like he really did go for it, and that's something I really just appreciate about this film. He really doesn't hold back at all here in terms of the directing, and I think that the film is that much better because of it. There's so many haunting directions that this movie really does take, and that was something I just really appreciated. There is a scene involving this fight, and the way it plays out is very Sam Raimi. Like, if you've seen any Sam Raimi movie, I mean, you can tell exactly what he is trying to do here. And I just think that his influence in this film, you know, I want to see more MCU films that are like this. I want to see more MCU films that, really go in with the idea of trying to do something different. I've said before that there are MCU films that, tackle different genres, but not in the way that this movie has. I want to see more like, something like this, like what Taika Waititi did in Thor Ragnarok. That's like the closest thing I can think of in terms of, directorial visions, but I feel like here, this really does feel like something different, and that's something I just really appreciate about this film. And I think overall, his directing is just fantastic here. I really love what he ended up doing. He's not afraid to get to some really just twisted elements that make this feel very unique in that way. And I thought overall, once the film does go to those darker places, it just becomes that much better. And there are so many just like bonkers ideas that he comes up with, and the film just really goes for it. And that's something I just really appreciate, is that it does not feel restrained in any way. I've heard some people complain about that, and I didn't really feel like that was the case. I feel like for the most part, Marvel did kind of just like let the reins off of him a bit and basically let Raimi do what he wanted. And I think the movie is that much better because of it. And getting into the writing here, I think the writing for the most part is still very good in this film. Now, the one thing I will say going into this movie is that the actual plot of this film, I cannot really get into. What I described as the plot of this movie is not really the plot of this movie. There's a lot more going on here, but despite that, the film ends up being rather simplistic in terms of what we're really dealing with here, what the actual conflict is, and I really did appreciate that right off the bat. I like that this movie isn't trying to be too, like, overly complex and things like that, and I think the movie works really well because of it. And I think in terms of, what they end up doing with the multiverse, this film does, for the most part, work pretty well with that. We get a better understanding of how the multiverse really works in this film, and I think overall, the writing is still pretty good here. That being said, I do also think the writing is probably one of the weaker elements of this film. Now, that's not to say the writing is bad in this movie. I just think that there are some elements that are a bit underwritten here. Because while we do have a pretty simplistic plot that is easy to follow, there is a lot of information that is given to us throughout the film, and we don't really get to fully understand it because the movie is constantly zipping through everything. This is one of the most fast-paced MCU films that I think I've seen ever. This film really wastes no time. It just kind of like thrusts you into this conflict, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I just feel like there's not a lot of time to process what's actually going on, and I think it would have actually elevated the film if they ended up doing that. I think the movie would have turned out better. But that being said, the individual character arcs that we get in this movie is something that I really did appreciate. Like I said, with Doctor Strange as a character, there's a good arc in this movie for him about the idea of, his real potential. Who does he really want to be at the end of the day? Is he this sorcerer supreme of sorts that is going to, look over, time and things like that, and is that going to be his main focus, or is he capable of being a real hero? And I think that's something that this film does dive into pretty well. We do get a more definitive look at who he really wants to be and him kind of living up to that potential. But it's what this movie does with Wanda as a character that I think is really going to impress a lot of people. Again, this really does feel like we are just given the most in-depth look at her in this film. Every sort of facet of Wanda is explored in this movie, and I really just loved what they ended up doing with her here. I think there were some really interesting directions they go with her character in this movie, but virtually all of them really do pay off in an amazing way, and I think it's without a doubt the highlight of this entire film. I think, all the characters are really well written here. America Chavez as a character, yes, she can be a bit of a plot device at points, but I do think they give her enough in this movie for you to latch onto, for me to really just get excited for the potential that this character really does have in the future. It's not necessarily fully tapped into in this film, but I think what we do get with her is still overall pretty satisfying. But again, for everything I like about the writing, there are some issues that do bring this film down. One of them being that I just think this film, again, zips through plots a little too quickly. I think there are some elements here that I wish were dived into a little bit more. There are some character decisions that are made in this movie that are really interesting, that I really do like, but I just wish we had a bit more time to fully explore them, because a lot of the time it just kind of feels like we are abruptly cutting to this specific decision, this specific choice for a character, and it just didn't feel quite as satisfying as it really could have been. And I'm kind of conflicted with how they ended up, approaching some of that. So the writing, again, isn't always the strongest in this movie, but when it works, it does work really well. The other thing I will say about this movie is that I don't think at points it fully works as a Doctor Strange sequel. I think that there are some elements here that they just simply did not know what to do with. The character of Mordo, for instance, I just don't think they know what to do with this character. They ended him off in a place in the first movie, and what we end up getting here just doesn't really align that much. And I just think that they could have done a better job with some of those elements. I think, again, the incorporation of things like Wanda Maximoff, like America Chavez, characters I do like, but sometimes they do overshadow the Doctor Strange characters in the film. So at points, it does kind of feel like maybe we should have gotten another movie before this. Maybe they should have given us, because this film was supposed to come out originally before No Way Home. And as much as I do enjoy the film that we have, I do kind of wonder, what does that movie look like? What really changes from them kind of structuring it differently? That's something I would like to at least hear about. It doesn't necessarily deter the film. It's just something that I noticed that I hope they can improve upon in Doctor Strange in future, films down the line. The world building is very strong here, but the one thing I will also say is that I think a lot of people are going into this film thinking there's going to be these like life-altering sort of changes to the MCU. It's really going to shake it up. That's not really the kind of movie we're dealing with here. Like I said, it's a little bit more simplistic this time around, and that is something that I think is going to disappoint some people. I myself wasn't necessarily disappointed. I appreciated what they ended up doing, but I did feel there were some things they could have dived deeper into in terms of the multiverse. And I think, again, it just stems back to the fact that the movie just kind of rushes through a lot of the exposition, a lot of the important stuff that maybe we're not as aware of, that we haven't really heard about since then. I wish they would have maybe just taken some time to really just let us soak all of that in, so that way when we start to get more into the thick of things, we are that much more invested into what's going on, because at points it is a bit hard to tell what is really going on, because they just kind of rush through pretty much everything. So I just wish they would have given us just a little bit more time to really understand, the real scope of what's going on here. Like I said, the creative elements that this film really does have is something that I just really do appreciate, and I think this film really does kind of go for it in terms of that. Also, the other thing I do want to bring up in this movie are the cameos. Now, I'm not going to obviously say what the cameos are or anything like that, but this is an issue I had writing-wise. The film, as many people expect, does have cameos, and I just found them to be kind of ineffective in this film. They don't necessarily deter the movie in any way, but they also don't enhance the film in any way. These are not cameos that necessarily excited me. These are not cameos that when they showed up, I was like, really excited. I was really delighted to see them in any sort of shape or form. And at the end of the day, I just felt they didn't really serve that much of a purpose in this movie, other than, oh my god, there's a bunch of cameos here. I feel like you honestly could have cut them out of the film, and the film would have not turned out all that different. So I just found that to be another element in the film that just didn't really work. But for the most part, the writing does work really well here. I think that the mission that these characters go on is one that is very interesting. It's definitely one that you are very much riveted by. I wish I could say more, but just for those that haven't seen it yet, respectfully, I'm not going to get into spoilers or anything like that, but I do think the writing is overall really well done here. Let's get into the cinematography of this film, because that's something else that I definitely was very impressed by. This film has a very specific visual style to it. At first, it does kind of look like a Marvel movie, just like you expect it to. But as the movie goes on, you start to realize this film is a lot darker. It's a lot more gruesome. There is legitimate blood. There's a gore in this movie, and that's something that I think people are not going to be ready for in this film. And I just really appreciate that they ended up going for it here. Some of the action in this movie is just unbelievable to watch. There is one scene especially, and I was really taken aback by the risks they ended up taking, by how far they really ended up taking some of the darkness of this film. But I think the movie is that much better because of it. I just really appreciated what they ended up doing. And the look and feel of the multiverse themselves, I think the world building is still very strong in this movie. Now, I will say, do not expect a lot of hopping between worlds. We really only visit a couple in this movie, but the ones that we get do have a very interesting look to them, and I really did appreciate what they end up doing with the visuals in this film. This is easily just one of the most visually stunning films within the entire MCU. They really do kind of push the boundaries of what they can really do, and I just really liked the way this film, I just really liked the way this film was shot and everything like that. There's also some really effective jump scares in this movie, and that's something I do want to get into. Like I said, this is very much a horror film, and with that, there are some really good, like, jump scares, and also some really good, like, visual motifs that do end up paying off in the end, and that's something else that I just really liked about this film. It kind of gave it its own identity in that way, and some of the imagery that's throughout this movie is legitimately really terrifying to look at. You kind of just want to look away, but yet you also can't help but look, just because of how incredible it all looks, and I loved what they end up doing with that. So again, I think the cinematography is just very well done here. The score by Danny Elfman is another thing that I just really love about this film. I love that Danny Elfman was able to do the score here, because he really does give this film this very sort of mystical sort of feel throughout, and I thought that, again, his score really just kind of encompassed what you expect to see in a Sam Raimi movie, and I think he did a really excellent job with that. So I really did enjoy his score throughout this entire film. And the editing, like, this is another issue that I did have with the movie. I did not feel that this movie, I understand that, not every MCU film has to be 2.5 hours. That is not at all what I'm saying. But I do think this film would have actually been, I do actually think this film would have benefited from at least 20 to 30 more minutes, because I just think that there's so much that happens in this movie, especially in the first hour, which honestly is not the greatest. I will say, the first, 30 minutes or so is not the greatest. It feels like very typical MCU fare, and you kind of are just wondering, you're kind of just hoping for it to turn out to be something a little bit better. You're hoping that this film is going to be able to find its footing, and thankfully it very much does. I just think that if they would have given the film a little bit more time, I think that it wouldn't have felt quite as sloppy of an introduction, because it does feel like we're really kind of just rushed into everything. We're not really given time to process a lot of what's going on. But at the end of the day, that really does not take away from my enjoyment of Multiverse of Madness. This is just such an ambitious film. It has such distinctive directing from Sam Raimi. It has a masterful performance here from Elizabeth Olsen, who maybe gives the best work she has ever given within the MCU. Benedict Cumberbatch and Xochitl Gomez are also really big standouts here. It really does go for it in terms of its horror elements, which I think is something a lot of people just aren't really going to expect. And the fact that this movie dared to do something different, that alone really does excite me. I love the fact that we are this deep into the MCU and they still are finding ways to tell these stories differently. It's not quite as insane and maddening as I think some are expecting, and there are elements that I wish were dived into a little bit more, but between the vastness of the worlds and but between the really incredible directing and truly stunning visuals and such a wonderful score from Danny Elfman, this film is truly just such a wild ride that I will not be forgetting anytime soon. It's really unlike any other MCU thing that I've seen in a while, and that's something I really just end up appreciating a lot about this film. So overall, I very much do recommend this one. I am going to give Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness a B. Really wish I could talk more about this one at length, but again, for those that haven't seen it, I'm trying to steer around spoilers as best as I really can. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. Let me know if you guys saw this movie at all, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.